What is going on, everybody? We are taking a look at a death and taxes list in Commander. Let's go. What up, what up, what up? Welcome back to my channel. I'm Roxora, and here we do all things Magic the Gathering. Today we are doing another Commander deck tech where I take a look at an EDH list that someone submitted, talk about the Commander, the individual card choices, as well as just the overall strategy of the deck. And at the end, I'll give it a rating out of 10. If you have a list that you want to be reviewed, go ahead and leave that down in the comments. And while you're there, leave a like and subscribe. It would really help me out a lot. All right, let's talk about this commander. So our submission today comes from Professor Amateur. As usually, he has done a lot of work, making lots of lists. This one is not of a new commander, but it does have a new card from Streets of New Capenna, which is pretty exciting. So here we've got Adeline, Resplendent Cathar, which was a legendary from Innistrad Midnight Hunt. And we've got one white for a star/4 legendary creature human knight. Its power is equal to the number of creatures you control. It's got vigilance, and when it attacks for each opponent, you make a 1/1 human token that's tapped and attacking that player or planeswalker they control. I am reading this card and just realizing for the first time that it says each opponent. I guess I've only really seen this card be played in standard or other constructed formats where you have one opponent, and here it's kind of cool. So yeah, you can already kind of see how it can be used. You can use it as human tribal, but here we're using it a little bit differently and using it in a death and taxes list. If you're unfamiliar with this archetype name, it's essentially a joke on that the only thing in life that are guarantees is death and taxes. In Magic we have 3 guarantees: death, taxes, and the existence of death and taxes as an archetype, and it essentially revolves around the death part being a aggressive deck with lots of creatures, and the taxes part being these kind of disruptive static effects that we call taxes. So anything to prevent or just make it harder for your opponent to play the game. So I think the best way to see what death and taxes has for us is to take a look at the list itself. Let's go. All right, so here is the list. It's fairly expensive, just putting that out there. It is kind of geared to be more competitive. I'm not sure if I would necessarily call this CDH, but I think it could definitely compete at a CEDH table, excuse me. And definitely has a lot of cards that, would not, lend to a good experience at a lower power leveled table. But that aside, again, we've already talked about Adeline. We've got only one planeswalker here, but it is a big one in the Wandering Emperor, excuse me, which has just become this insane card in pretty much every single format, just good in pretty much all stages of the game. When you're behind, when you're ahead, when you're at parity, when you need to be attacking, when you need to be defending. It does all of these things really, really well. One of the things that I like that it does for this deck is, Adeline, while, it can get pretty big power and make a lot of 1/1s, still only has 4 toughness and doesn't have any evasive abilities. So Wandering Emperor, being able to grow it and give it first strike repeatedly can go a long ways to allow it to attack, which is really big for this deck. All right. And then we've got a bunch of creatures and enchantments here to be this kind of, again, taxing effect while also making wide and large boards. So we've got Angel of Jubilation, which is a great example of a death and taxes type card. It gives creatures you control +1, it's got flying, and it has the static ability that makes it so that your players cannot pay life or sacrifice creatures to activate spells. Or abilities, cast spells or activated abilities. So, already if there's a deck that, wants to, sacrifice creatures or something, which I think is more popular than the paying life part, but still prevalent, then this card shuts that down. We've got Archon of Emeria, which is a very common hate piece. We've got Aven Mind Sensor, and then we've got Benalish Marshal here for some Anthem effects. So you can already kind of see, how this works. Containment Priest, Strength Magistrate, and Eidolon Rhetoric, all being, very common hate pieces, taxing effects. We've got an Elishnorn here, just as kind of this more late game. There's no way for us to really cheat it out. In fact, that's again something that typically Death and Taxes decks try to prevent. But we can just cast this for 7 mana, make our dudes bigger, and make our opponent's dudes smaller. Of course, we have to have the best turn 1 play in the format, probably, I guess, other than like Mystic Remora or Soul Ring or sorry. But definitely Esper Sentinel has become a very strong card in Commander. and it's exactly the same here. We got Aethersworn Canonist and Grand Abolisher, as well as Hushbringer, Hushwing Griff. A lot of hushes. We want our opponents to stay silent here. Again, all these taxing effects. We got Leonin Arbiter, which we'll talk about later because this does do a lot of good things for the deck, actually. Linvala, this is a great example of a tax, a Death and Taxes card. It flies, it attacks, and then it also prevents your opponents from being able to activate abilities of creatures. So very, very nice. Here is, by the way, our one card from New Capenna, Mage's Attendant, 3/2 Cat Rogue, and when it enters the battlefield, you get a blue. It's a blue for some reason. 1/1 creature token with pay 1 and sacrifice this creature. Counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 1. So kind of like a not necessarily force spike, but a non-creature force spike. And yeah, so this, if you have ways to, reanimate it, can, be valuable. Yeah, so this is a good turn 4 play, to just, if your opponent thinks something is, if you think, your opponent's going to do something crazy, you can always tax that 1 mana. And again, works really well with cards like Esper Sentinel and things like that. Yeah. Sorry, I was going to mention Catilda here. Which is another kind of Crimson Vow Innistrad plain card, and it works well with this game plan of Death and Taxes. The protection from vampires isn't as relevant, but we're going to be playing lots of enchantments. There aren't as many spirits, but mainly we're looking at enchantments. So this can get really big and it's going to fly. And if it ever dies, or if somehow it ends up in the graveyard, we can disturb it and attach that onto Adeline and give it flying, lifelink, and protection from vampires. And so then that is another thing that will allow Adeline to attack continuously, which is, again, what you want to be doing while establishing your tax pieces. Let's see. We got Mother of Runes here, which is doing a double roll. Do we also have... oh no, do we not have... the other one? Giver of Runes? Oh, I guess we don't have Giver of Runes. I would have expected us to run both. But yeah. Mother of Runes is still fine. Maybe they decided that they only wanted one of these effects. But this can do a lot, both offensively and defensively. If your opponent only has one color of creatures around, you can give Adeline. Adeline is the wizard. You can give it a protection, and that will allow you to attack and just get in there. Or if your opponent has some kind of removal spell, you can keep this up and protect it. So yeah, definitely liking Mother of Runes. And then we've got Ranger Captain here, which is a great consistency piece, as well as this kind of silence effect. So you can grab any of these 1-drops. You can grab your Esper Sentinel, your Mother of Runes. So yeah, really, really strong. And then also, you can sacrifice it to essentially prevent your opponent from casting creature spells, which can do a lot. If your opponent is storming off, if you are afraid they have counter spells, there's a lot that this card can do, especially in Commander. Again, it's still good in Modern and Constructed and everything, but Commander, there's a lot of versatility for how you use that effect. And let's see, we've got Sanctum Prelate. These are pretty obvious ones. Sarah's Ascendant is an obvious inclusion in this kind of deck. Spirit of Labyrinth, self-explanatory. And then we've got Thraben Watcher, as well as over here we've got Always Watching, which was very similar to Angel of Jubilation, just giving you this anthem effect to all your non-token creatures. So like again, Adeline and all of your like, dudes over here. Again, not your tokens, but again, you're really not making that many tokens unless you are using Adeline to the fullest extent. We've got Takali Honor Guard, which I think as we've talked about with Hushman Griff, shutting down enter the battlefield effects. Very, very strong. And then we've got this Weathered Wayfinder, excuse me, which is just good since we don't have a lot of ways to ramp with, putting extra lands into play. We're trying not to use lots of artifact mana, so Weathered Wayfinder is a great card to find off of something like Ranger Captain, because, your opponents will likely have more ramp, more lands than you, and so you can use this to your advantage. And remember, you can always activate this and then play your land afterwards. Yeah. Let's take a look at the instant sorceries and artifacts here. This is a fairly short list. Again, most of our stuff is fairly limited to stuff that can attack or stuff that stops our opponent from doing things. So yeah, we've got this Replenish, which puts enchantments from the graveyard into play, or just this giant reanimate for enchantments. So you can see all of these enchantments over here that can come right back into play. Again, there also are, the spirits and the eidolons and stuff like that that can come back. So, that works as well. Let's see. We've got Search for Glory, which I, was trying to explore like what it can get in this deck. And in general, you're really just trying to find, either your legendary creatures or your legendary cards like the Hall and the Nykthos. The big one being Nykthos. So this card can search for those as well as your creatures if you need them to. And then we have a few sagas here, and then we also even have one on Thin Ice. So this is kind of a really good catch-all card. We have Enlightened Tutor to grab specific the just enchantments, but then adding this to again search for Nykthos or searching for a really crucial tax piece like Livinia, let's say, or what's another legendary? I guess just Catilda, or which is not a tax piece, but like you could be something that you want to search for, or not Linvala, Elishnor. So all these things can all be grabbed just by Search for Glory, which is pretty nice. Then we've got Sevine's Reclamation, which is a good reanimation target, not just for your creatures, but also again for your enchantments over here. And then if you ever flash it back, you get 2, which is really powerful. Wings of Abandon was a card that I wanted to mention because, thinking about, wouldn't a card like Settle the Wreckage be better? Or, a card, was one of the thoughts that I was thinking of, or just like another, Wrath Effect, or something like that. But again, we were talking about cards like Leonin Arbiter as well as even Mind Sensor. So if you have those out with Wings of Abandon, again, it's the same thing with Settle the Wreckage, but with Wings of Abandon, it exiles them and they don't have to be attacking, so you can pay 6 mana, exile all of the creatures that are on the battlefield that are not your own, and then your opponents barely get to search if they have Aven Mind Sensor, and they might not get to search at all if they have Leonin Arbiter and they don't have any mana available. Wrath of God should be pretty self-explanatory. We don't want too many of these effects, and we want to be very careful about when you fire this off. But it's nice because again, you are a creature deck. You're a creature deck in the sense that you have creatures in your deck, but you don't really need them always on the battlefield at all times in order to win. So you can always Wrath of God, reset the board, cast your Adeline or cast something else to get your board presence back. Already talked about Enlightened Tutor. Again, we'll talk about the enchantments in just a sec, but that one should be fairly obvious. Source of Plowshares, as again, an obvious inclusion. And let's talk about the artifacts here. So we're being very specific with the artifacts that we're including. Notice that there is no Soul Ring in this deck, which I find very spicy. We've got Chalice of the Void to shut down a specific converted mana cost. You can cast this on one. If you have Ancient Tomb, and then you shut down Soul Ring, and you shut down a whole bunch of 1 mana spells. So that can be pretty good. We've got Grafdigger's Cage, which should be pretty self-explanatory. Null Rod, Static Orb, Storage Matrix, Torpor Orb, and Trinisphere. All these things to slow down and disrupt our opponents, especially with Null Rod. Again, that's why we don't have any artifact mana in this deck. But I guess that's requiring an activation cost. I guess that's just activated abilities. But more importantly, like Static Orb, Storage Matrix. Storage Matrix is really nice because, if you just have your creatures out and, you don't need to cast any more spells, you've got Adeline out, you can just choose to untap your creatures. Adeline even has Vigilance, so with Static Orb, you can just continue to attack with Adeline, keep her untapped, and keep attacking with, the soldiers that she makes, and then just untap your lands, and then your opponents are forced into a odd spot. So really like the inclusion of Storage Matrix here. That one's a pretty good one. And then, Trinisphere is another one of why we don't have too many 1-drops or just like cheap cards in general. This makes it so that if a card costs less than 3, it costs 3 mana. So, paying 3 for Elsworn, Aethersworn Canonist, not that bad, but paying 3 for something like Esper Sentinel doesn't feel quite as good. So, again, trying to limit what we play that affects us negatively. All right, so now let's talk about all these enchantments. So we already talked about Always Watching. Aura of Silence is really good. I didn't even realize this only affects your opponents. I guess I should have realized because, it's supposed to be played in an enchantment deck. So that can be very powerful. We got Blind Obedience to make your artifacts and creatures your opponents control enter tap, shutting down artifact mana or heavily taxing it, shutting down any combos, creature combos that require tapping or attacking or things like that. Again, limiting haste and things like that. So a lot of things that Blind Obedience does that's really good. And then we have this Extort mechanic, which, in Commander can gain you a little bit of life, which is nothing to scoff at. But it's not necessarily the most crucial part of the card. We've got Court of Grace, which is I don't even remember seeing this card much in other decks, but I really like it. You become the Monarch, which should immediately draw you a card, and then also at the beginning of your upkeep, if you were still the Monarch, you make a 4/4 Angel. If you're not, you make a 1/1 Spirit with flying. Which can, attack and get you back the Monarch. And again, it still makes this every turn. So that's pretty good. And then if you ever make a 4/4 Angel with this, it just feels insane. I got a little bit more removal with Darksteel Mutation. Deafening Silence is an obvious tax piece. You play this on turn 1 and it is very, very strong. Fall of the Thran is a good tutor with Enlightened Tutor if you are feeling good about your position in the game and you want to destroy lands. Ghostly Prison, I believe we also have another effect like this, just to prevent your opponents from attacking you, because if you start playing these tax pieces, people are going to be upset with you, and then, yeah, you're going to want to play this out and protect yourself. We've got Grasp of Fate, which is an obvious inclusion. This is a very strong card, just to deal with some pesky permanents, more removal in Heliod's Punishment. Land Tax is another really good inclusion for this type of deck that is not going to be ramping out. Also just a good card in general, where you can just get 3 planes into your hand, since your opponents control more lands than you, and just play that out so that you can gradually just draw 3 planes out of your deck every turn, which can feel really, really strong. And eventually you won't have any more lands in your deck, and you'll get to just draw spells. Here's another one from Kamigawa, or a new saga. So we've got, oops, trying to get it so that we can see it. Here we go. So we've got Michiko's Reign of Truth, which is a Good card to play if you have a lot of enchantments and artifacts. It pumps a creature twice and then transforms into a creature that gets +1/+1 for each artifact or enchantment you control. So it can kind of, close games out once you are ready, once you've got all your taxing pieces out, comes down, buffs up, Adeline or something like that, and does a lot of damage. Could even do like commander damage. Like if you have like some creatures and you have a bunch of enchantments, play this out. Adeline's got like 10, 10 power maybe. Do that again the next turn. That's 20 damage, and you're almost there. So that's definitely nothing to scoff at. We've got Nevermore here, which is just shut down a particular spell. You can name commanders. You can name a particular combo piece like Ad Nauseam or Brain Freeze, things like that. So really good card to have. On Thin Ice, I think we've talked about. Out of Time is another one that is just like a wrath effect. With the vanishing, so it enters, they all phase out, and then eventually they all come back later. And yeah, so this can do good stuff if you can replenish it or things like that. So cool card. I really like the inclusion of this Paladin class. It comes down and makes it more difficult for your opponent to interact during your turn. Buffs your board, and then eventually makes it so that if you get to level 3, Adeline can attack and get lots of power and even double strike, making it very difficult to block. Planar Collapse is another wrap that is possible for your opponents to play around, but if they ever have 4 creatures in play, if there are even four creatures in play ever, everything gets destroyed. And again, it can be brought back with Sarah's Sanctum, not Sarah's Sanctum, excuse me, Hall of Helion's Generosity, or Replenish and things like that. So both, not Grasp of Fate, where'd it go? Out of Time and Planar Collapse can be this kind of continuous disruption for creature decks, or just any deck that wants to produce lots of creatures. We've got one of my favorites from Alesha in Reconnaissance. This card pretty much is here to protect Adeline. You attack with it, you make all of your 1/1s, and then you reconnaissance them out of combat if your creatures are at risk of dying. And then so then you can just continuously do that, make lots of tokens, untap them, and it also just gives all your creatures vigilance essentially, since you can after damage calculation activate reconnaissance and then untap them. So really a strong card for any type of attack triggers that go on. So definitely something to look at, by the way, if you are playing something like that. Of course, we've got to have Rest in Peace. Of course, we've got to have Rule of Law. Seal Away here is a decent piece of removal. I'm not the biggest fan of it here since it has to be tapped. So your opponent can play around this and just not attack with something, or just not activate something until it's time. So I'm not sure if there's a better card to put here, but yeah, just know that this is not one of the strongest cards in the deck. Just making a note. Seal of Cleansing. We have a lot of these, destruction of artifacts, enchantments. We already have Cathar Commando here. I guess you can never really have too many. There's the other card that I was thinking of, Sphere of Safety, which is, can be a more powerful ghostly prison, even though it's a little pricey. Land this down while you have established a lot of your tax pieces, and it's going to be really difficult for your opponents to attack you, hopefully. There we go. There's the card that we need. Stony Silence. Shut off all those pesky artifacts. Same thing with Suppression Field to shut off activated abilities. And here we have another saga here in Restoration of Aganjo. Getting planes, getting to reanimate a permanent with 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So that can be anything from, like your 2-drops like Grand Demolisher, or even your enchantments like Blind Obedience, or even your lands like Nixos. Or some of your artifacts here like Null Rod. So this card can get a lot of stuff back if they end up in the graveyard. And then it turns into this, Fox Monk that also has Vigilance and makes a 1/1 when it attacks or blocks. So again, that can be used kind of like Adeline, where you can attack with it, use Reconnaissance to remove it from combat, and then continuously just get those spirits every turn. So yeah, that's a lot of the enchantments here. So let's talk about very briefly the lands. Nothing really crazy here. We've got a Ganjo as some utility, Ghost Quarter, and Flagstone. And then we've got this Hall to be, again, this value effect of putting them on top of our library. We talked about Nykthos. Sarah's Sanctum should be pretty self-explanatory. Same thing for War Room. Getting to just pay 1 life to draw a card every turn seems pretty nice. And then the big card that I wanted to go over here is a card that was actually in a previous video, Homeward Path, which is a card that Professor Amateur is pretty high on, and I've been informed that it's primarily because of this card, Gilded Drake, which can come into play and exchange itself. So there's this, and there's also just plenty of these kind of mind control effects, but that's the main one that Professor Amateur has pointed out. So stating that for the record here, that's one of the reasons why you want to run a card like Homeward Path. But again, if no one in your meta is playing this, playing Gilded Drake, no need to worry about it. But it is also $19. So again, I don't want to be like, oh, I'm buy this if it's not something that's happening to you. So what was I gonna say? So yeah, so that's pretty much it. Lots of creatures, lots of enchantments, and then lots of these effects. Some noteworthy exclusions. We've got no Thalia effects here. No Thalia Guardian of Thraben or Thalia Heretic Cathar. The Heretic Cathar, really can be, is just not as good as Blind Obedience. It is another creature, I guess, and it does have first strike, so it can be a little bit of a better attacker, but it's susceptible to removal. We don't want Thalia Guardian of Thraben because we want to be casting our non-creature spells. And so that makes a lot of sense. I feel like a lot of people would just shove Thalia in here, play it, and realize, wait a sec, my on Thin Ice now costs 2 mana. So not exactly what you want to be doing. As for the overall strategy that you can also view, I forgot there's a primer here. Basically talking about that this is a fair deck. There's nothing crazy going on here, no crazy combos. Turn 1, draw a card as Garfield intended. Play 1 spell as Garfield intended. I love this little snippets here. Yeah. And then just beat the crap out of your enemies and stuff like that. So yeah, you can go ahead and read that. But yeah, the deck really is pretty straightforward, and it's just trying to play these pieces that attacks the actions or the types of effects that most Commander players enjoy. Again, searching their library, having things die, all of these things. So that's the goal of the deck. And then once that's done, you can play Adeline, do something like enchant it with the other side of Catilda, and get attacking. So yeah. So that's the goal of the deck. Let's kind of talk about how I would grade it, and I always like to talk about in what environment should you play this. This is in a scenario where you're trying to be annoying. Sorry, Prof, but like you are trying to be annoying. You're trying to do things that we call going against the grain instead of going with the grain. If that's you, then great. But also be aware that you're going to go into the right game. You don't want to enter a game, start playing all your tax pieces, and have people get up and leave. So definitely would steer away from trying to play this in a casual group. But aside from that, I think the deck is pretty cool, although with some caveats. Number one is that while Adeline, there are cards in here that work well with Adeline, again, like Reconnaissance and Catilda and things like that. the deck isn't really themed around Adeline. Again, it's not supposed to be, but the big thing here is that there's nothing that's unique about Adeline in this list. Really, Adeline can be any legendary white creature, and the deck would essentially function mostly the same. In fact, many people do stuff like Linvala instead, because it is just right there in your command zone. So that's not necessarily this abhorrent thing, but it's just a thing of I would like to see some more cards that make use of Adeline, whether that's more creatures, more beaters that scale off of the number of creatures you control, something else like the other side of Catilda that can allow Adeline to get through, again, of these wandering Emperor type effects that, still work to create this large board, but still work to help Adeline connect and get attacking and give you all these tokens, because this could be a really strong effect. Your opponents aren't allowed to cast multiple spells, and you just get to, slam them and generate lots of humans every turn. But in order to do that, you have to get out ahead, which again you can do, but just by casting this on turn 3. But then you also have to be able to attack with it. So again, unless you have something like Reconnaissance or the Wandering Emperor, I don't see that happening as much with the current cards that we have at our disposal. So yeah, those are my complaints, but other than that, it is a really cool, again, like transposing of a constructed archetype into Commander. And this is not old. This is not any new thing. There's been lots of lists like these, but it's also cool to see, again, like the mage attendants being used. We've got, the sagas are a nice touch. I definitely think Reign of Truth and Restoration of Aganjo work well here. It's my first time seeing this Angel of Jubilation. Like I know it's a card, but it makes a lot of sense too. And obviously I like seeing Wandering Emperor. It's a strong card, and all that stuff. So I'm curious if they knew not to include the other Giver of Runes in this list, or if that was left out by accident, or they just didn't want to include it. But yeah, other than that, it's a pretty cool list. So with that being said, what should we give this list out of 10? I'm gonna go ahead again because of just because of how I grade these things. Again, it is a good list, but again, I don't feel like it's particularly unique. And I think there could have been one or two more cards put to really enable the commander, or enable this game plan of taxing and then attacking with Adeline. So I'm gonna go ahead and give it I'll give it a 7.5. Still a good grade, but not the most polished list. Although again, I know that Professor Amateur had kind of just thrown this list together, made it fairly nonchalantly. So I'm sure that they will have some edits or revisions to this list. This is just a first draft. All right, that is going to do it from me. I'm going to hope you guys enjoyed. Remember, you can submit some deck lists for submissions either down in the comments or in my Discord, link in the description. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed, and I will see you for the next video.